CD Projekt Red had a pretty good April Fool's prank this year, introducing a limited floppy edition of Cyberpunk 27. Are you a fan of sleeper gaming PCs? I am. Do you yearn for the retro-futuristic experience of original Cyberpunk? I don't know what they mean by that, but whatever. Do you miss the good old days when installation was a ritual of its own? You'll love a floppy edition. In 97,619 3.5-inch floppy disks. It's obviously a joke. No Cyberpunk on floppy disks. Yeah, makes sense. Now, but can you make a computer that can run Cyberpunk and has a floppy disk drive? Well, for the 3.5 floppy disk, of course you can. Super easy, barely an inconvenience. Plug in a USB floppy drive and go. But what if you want to go deeper? Perhaps even dumber. Can you build a computer that can run Cyberpunk 2077 fairly well with dual floppy drives? Both a 3.5 and a 5.25 floppy drive? No grease weasels, nothing like that. Actually recognized in Windows to have both drives. Now, I decided to find out. And this is going to take a truly stupid and pointless computer. I'm just the guy to make it. So the problem for a 5.25 floppy disk is pretty simple. You can't really adapt them via USB the way you can for 3.5-inch disks. Or rather, I guess maybe you could, but no one's developed a system to do it because why would they? I'm not entirely sure. The point is, to make it work in Windows, you need a motherboard that supports it. You're talking about an old motherboard then. You're going to have a system where the motherboard is quite old, and of course de facto then a huge CPU bottleneck as well. So that's what we're going to be fighting really throughout this build. At first I thought I'd be doing a Core 2 quad build, and the logical choice is the Core 2 quad Q9650. It's pretty cheap considering it was a top-of-the-line processor when it came out. There is a faster one, but you don't need to worry about that. Not by much. This was a 4-core, 4-thread processor that came out in 2008. Really the pinnacle of LGA 775. I'm not counting the Core 2 Extreme. And you can get a lot of features on this with the last motherboards. I was really wanting to use this one from Gigabyte. You can see it has a lot of features that are useful. It has DDR3, lots of SATA, that floppy header. Of course, it's going to work fine with the Core 2 Quad. And I actually tried this system out, and you know what? It just isn't fast enough. 775, it just doesn't work to give you the kind of performance you need to run, frankly, even older games, let alone Cyberpunk. It was a cool build, but it just didn't get me there. And so I was back to the drawing board for a bit and had to throw out this idea of doing an LGA 775 build. So I realized LGA 1366, the first generation of Core i7, might actually be exactly what I need. And I zoomed in pretty quickly on this motherboard, the GA X58A UD3R, excuse me. Now, Gigabyte kept supporting 5.25 floppy drives on their motherboard through this revision. It actually says so in the documentation. With this motherboard, you're getting much closer to modern features. It gives you the X58A as opposed to the X58 supports SATA 3. So we're getting the full power of the SSD. We're not going to have as much of a bottleneck there. It supports 3-channel DDR3, which leads to an interesting point. These first-generation Core i7s, they're really closer to workstation CPUs than desktop CPUs. And the performance of a lot of these is probably closer to a very early Ryzen chip than a i5, for instance, of that generation. You see all the features of a list here. Do all of these matter now? No. It does have a very nice sound chip built in. So I really wanted the i7 980X or i7 990X. They're pretty similar in performance. Both offer 6 cores, 12 threads, 130 watt TDP. It's basically a ridiculously inefficient Ryzen 1600. You should never buy one of these just because of the power consumption, but it's a pretty powerful CPU actually. The only problem is the i7 980X, even though it's now 14 years old, really it's still pretty expensive on eBay. But look at those statistics, and then look at the Xeon W3680. It's almost exactly the same processor, only it's overclocked. You can buy these on eBay for a song. I got one of them for $18. And frankly, with one of these, we're off to the races.
And here's the finished product. This is an old Americomp case I just got off eBay. You have that little front air intake. It's not great, but it's something. Reset and power buttons. The 3.5 floppy came with a case, which was very nice. The case came with an optical drive that was on its last legs. I thought about trying to yellow this to make it look even, but I feel like white optical drives that didn't quite fit the color of the rest of the case makes it almost more period correct than getting everything the right color. Now, on the other hand, this 5 1/4 beige optical drive came separately and it fits just absolutely perfectly, so maybe that's wrong. But this is it. My bridge sleeper, semi-sleeper, whatever you want, hybrid sleeper, whatever it is. This is it. It's kind of beautiful, I gotta admit. Look at this machine from the top. It's sort of striking. You have this very old school front. You know, you can see the top of a 5 1/4 drive, and as you go backwards, just go straight to this modern power supply. Really is cool how all these parts can work together in harmony. Here's the system under the hood. There's some interesting stuff going on here, I think. Really weird mix of components, but that's the whole idea of the build, of course. This came with a power supply. Obviously, it's not going to power what I intended. So I have to take it out. The Corsair CX650M is plenty for this build. It's better than the power supply would have been back in the day. It's still nicely small. I actually tried this with a larger power supply just physically, and the system I found was getting hotter. Generally speaking, a little more airflow is quite useful here in having a smaller power supply. Now, as you can kind of tell, a 120 millimeter CPU cooler was not an option in this build. It just literally wouldn't fit in this old ATX case. The solution was the Noctua 92 millimeter CPU cooler that you see here. It was doing well, but I found putting a second fan on it to do a push-pull configuration really helps with temperatures quite a bit. Of course, once you're doing Noctua, you might as well go all the way. The 80 millimeter fan that you have just below the power supply is actually an 80 millimeter bracket that was built into the case, so that's easy enough. The other one, though, just above the GPU, I actually got a four port cover for four slots. It has the four, and that fits perfectly with an 80 millimeter fan. It's actually really useful for getting exhaust, and I've noticed too that the north bridge of this board gets pretty hot, and accordingly, I found that having that fan there really helps. Finally, you can see that there actually is an 80 millimeter intake in the front of this case. Is it great? Well, no, not really. But it's there. Air does come in, and having an 80 millimeter fan that's actually on the bracket that's supposed to be there does definitely help bring air in. Now, this is obviously an overkill sort of GPU. The NVIDIA RTX 2060 Super, but of course that's part of the point here. And this CPU can absolutely drive it. And these blower fan models are not popular for a variety of reasons, but in this sort of case, it's actually fantastic because the most important thing you want to do here, get that heat out of the case. Even though the car is going to run a little hotter, getting the heat out of the case is more than worth it. One annoying thing about this board is the floppy header is all the way over there. You can kind of see it there. Sorry if the light's a little bad. And the gist of it is it has to go over everything. I wish the floppy header was in the front of the board. That's not going to happen. And so, yeah. In addition, you can see over there we have three DIMMs, 24 gigabytes of DDR3 memory. And you see the board itself. The board is the Gigabyte UDR X58A. The X58A UDR3. The X58A distinction matters a little bit. On the SATA ports, that gives you 2 SATA 3 ports for 6 gigabits per second. Is that going to be a life or death thing for performance? No, but it does allow us to get the most out of the SSD we can get. Other than that, you can see it has a nice setup, Northbridge cooler, and a heat pipe on Northbridge cooler, and the ports. This is designed, I think this has 3 PCI Express X16 ports. We're only using 1 of them, obviously. Yeah. Other than that, it's a really nice old ATX case, very old case. You see we have an old school PC speaker over there, still hooked up. I've done what cable management I can do, which is not necessarily a ton, but I started tucking some cables in. And you can see also on the 3.5 floppy drive, I'm using a USB to floppy connector because that works fine for that, going to the header on the board for USB, whereas a 5.25 drive is using the regular floppy connector and an old school Molex connector for power. So nothing too crazy going on here, except it's a really weird combo of parts that all work together. I mean, I guess the 2060 or the power supply is probably the newest part, whereas the 5.25 drive is almost certainly the oldest part. I'm guessing they were built about 25 years apart, but it all works. So looking at the back of his computer itself is really a trip back in time. And you can see the different generations that are here. The power supply, of course, is fairly modern. And on the other hand, you see the contrast between the motherboard and its very 2010 I/O and a much older I/O on the back of the case. This motherboard does actually have headers for serial and parallel, I believe. Could be fun to populate those connectors, although it's not going to help airflow. Now, the board itself has a really 2010 mix. You have PS2 keyboard and mouse. You have optical audio out. You have a CMOS clear battery, FireWire, eSATA, USB 3, which was not absolutely given back then, but it's becoming more common. Of course, very useful to have. The aforementioned 80mm fan, and the 2060 Super. So one kind of surprising thing for me was this system really just works. Took a little time to get it all set up. Wrestling with a motherboard to get the cooler on and all that. There definitely were times when I was building it where heat was an issue, but I think I have it pretty well tamed now. If we go down to look at Open Hardware Monitor, we can see all those temperatures are really within normal boundaries. The SSD temperature is fine. The GPU temperature is more than fine. It's 31 degrees Celsius, high 29 right now. The CPU is running a little bit higher. And if we bring it up to the Northbridge, you'll see the Northbridge gets the hottest in general. Northbridge is at 53 Celsius. These X58 Northbridges, they get hot. But putting that 80mm fan on the PCI Express slots actually really helped a lot to keep it cooler, move air over it. Be better to have air blowing onto it, but the system is just fine at idle. I should say too, this is actually on a 4 gigahertz mild overclock. The W3680 I have in here is supposed to be 3.3 gigahertz, but as the W3680 is unlocked to on multiplier, so you can very easily overclock it to 4 gigahertz, which is what I did in the BIOS. And yeah, it looks weird, but it also looks kind of normal because it just works. And if you're going to build a computer that's going to have all of these parts, you're going to want them to show up in my computer. You're going to want to have a 5 1/4 drive as A, which indeed is exactly what we have. You can see that. And you want your 3 1/2 drive to show up too, and drives A and B show up normally. Now, if we try to use the A drive here, you will see no disk in there right now. And the B drive. It'll take a little longer, but both of them are hooked up correctly. No disk, but that's fine. I think the slow timing is using the USB controller instead.
So I want to try this out in a few games. First game I definitely wanted to try was Doom Eternal. I figured it'd be kind of funny to run Doom Eternal on this computer that looks like it was designed to run the original Doom, but actually can run Doom Eternal without any issues. I'm not actually good at this game, or really, honestly, I'm kind of one of those old school gamers who's mostly good at old games at best. But it does give you a good example of how well this thing runs it. The bottleneck is actually pretty clearly the GPU. I didn't want to shell out for a 4090 for this thing. This is sort of a lark anyway. But the 2060 clearly is the limitation at ultra nightmare settings, 1080p.
City of Taras, Nevada, site of the first recorded demon attack in Argentina. According to the Korax tablet, the city would have been lost had it not been for the arrival of the Slayer.
Another game that looks like this computer would have run in its original state is Quake 2. Now, we have an RTX card in here. How about running Quake 2 RTX? Well, it just runs great, and it's really cool to be running Quake 2 RTX on this system. I have two examples here, one of the water you're seeing now, and one of more regular gameplay.
Recon established and confirm heavy fortification near enemy comm facility.
So I'm not actually that much of an expert in Cyberpunk, and I let the game choose the settings for me. I think it's a pretty nice mix of settings. It also is using DLSS, and using DLSS was frankly part of the appeal in this system, figuring that it might need a boost in some of the newest games. But you can see the demo that's in Cyberpunk right now. It handles it pretty well. This computer can absolutely run Cyberpunk. Is it a computer you should buy in 2024 to run Cyberpunk? Heck no. But can it run it? Absolutely.
El crimen no te deja dormir. Con Cybersecurity lo harás hasta la mañana. Ahora con cámaras térmicas.
So the last thing I wanted to try is Portal to RTX. Now, some of you are already screaming, don't do it, and this machine is not up for it. The graphics card is a problem to be sure. The whole thing, though, Portal RTX is a notorious system breaker. It does run it, though. You have to crank the DLSS way up to look really ugly for it to run, but it runs. Well, hope you've enjoyed this video. I would not recommend building this system, but it's kind of cool to see what you can do. I don't know exactly what this is. Is it a bridge sleeper, a semi-sleeper, just a regular sleeper, or something else? I don't fully know. But you can do some pretty cool stuff with the LGA 1366 platform and make a system which is deep into the legacy area but still works today. So if you see one of these systems are cheap, try it out. Have a great day.